My name is Madison Blake, and if you asked anyone in Charlotte, North Carolina about my family, they'd likely paint a picture of success, power, and status. The Blake family was seen as elite, untouchable even. But while everyone else admired us from afar, I knew the truth hidden behind the grand estate gates. I was never part of that picture. I was the youngest of 3 children, the unwanted afterthought. Ethan, my older brother, was the heir, the golden boy destined to carry on the Blake legacy. Captain of his high school football team, Ivy League, graduate, and already running a division of my father's company by his late 20s. Valerie, my sister, was the princess. Flawless, graceful, married into old money, and constantly plastered all over social media as the perfect daughter. Then there was me, Madison, the disappointment, the odd one, the failure who never quite fit into the mold my parents crafted so carefully. Every conversation at home was a painful reminder of my insignificance. Madison, why can't you be more like Ethan? Or Valerie never caused us this much stress. Their words sliced deeper with each passing year. I was passionate about technology. I loved coding, tinkering with computers, and dreaming about creating something revolutionary. But in my parents' eyes, tech was for nerds and losers. Real. Success came from managing businesses, making deals, and marrying well. My dreams were nothing more than childish fantasies to them. Even my high school graduation was a slap in the face. While Ethan had a gala-worthy celebration, and Valerie rode into hers on a literal horse-drawn carriage, mine was reduced to a backyard barbecue with cheap decorations and forced smiles. No one cares about your boring achievements, Madison, my mother said bluntly when I asked why I didn't get a party like my siblings. I laughed it off publicly, but that night I cried quietly in my room, wondering why I was never enough. Years went by, and the pattern never changed. Family dinners revolved around Ethan's promotions and Valerie's luxurious vacations. I became a ghost in my own home, only noticed when they needed someone to take a family photo or fetch drinks during parties. The tipping point came during my parents' annual charity gala. It was their biggest event of the year, filled with Charlotte's who's who. I wore a simple black dress, not wanting to draw attention. But invisibility had become my curse and my shield. Halfway through the night, as I stood near the bar sipping my drink, a wealthy guest I'd never met approached me with a puzzled expression. "Oh, and who might you be? Ethan's assistant?" Before I could even respond, my mother's shrill laughter cut through the noise. "Oh no, that's Madison, our other child, still trying to figure herself out," she said, dismissively waving, her hand as if I were a minor inconvenience. I felt the heat rush to my face. The humiliation was instantaneous and absolute. People chuckled politely and moved on, but I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. That was the exact moment I realized I no longer belonged there, if I ever did at all. I left the gala early without saying goodbye, drove home, and spent the entire night packing my belongings. By dawn, I had booked a one-way ticket to Austin, Texas. I didn't tell anyone. No dramatic exits, no confrontations, just silence. They probably didn't even notice I was gone until days later. Austin was everything Charlotte wasn't. It was fresh, vibrant, and full of people who didn't care about last names or country clubs. Starting over wasn't easy. I rented a tiny apartment, worked long hours as a freelance developer, and lived on instant noodles for months. But for the first time in my life, I felt free. Every rejection fueled me. Every sleepless night coding pushed me further. Slowly, my freelance gigs turned into contracts. Contracts turned into partnerships. And soon enough, I launched my own tech startup focusing on healthcare solutions. I poured every ounce of myself into that company. Failure was not an option. I would succeed not just for me, but to prove them wrong. By the time I was 29, my company had raised millions in funding. Investors trusted me. Clients respected me. Forbes even featured me in their top 30 under 30 list, calling me one of the most promising entrepreneurs in the country. Still, I stayed quiet. I never reached out to my family. Not once. Let them believe I was still lost, still figuring myself out. They didn't deserve to know who I had become. But deep down, I knew one thing for sure. Sooner or later, they would come knocking. Sooner or later, life would remind them that the daughter they discarded wasn't gone. She was simply becoming unstoppable. As I stood in my Austin office one due evening, overlooking the city skyline with a glass of wine in hand, I whispered the words I had carried since the day I left Charlotte. One day, they'll have no choice but to remember my name. Little did I know, that day was closer than I ever imagined. Austin, Texas was nothing like Charlotte. In Charlotte, everything was about appearances, who you knew, what you wore, which social circles you belonged to. In Austin, nobody cared if you came from a prestigious family or if your parents had donated a wing to the local art museum. People here cared about ideas, about hustle, about building something from nothing. That realization hit me hard during my first few months here. I arrived with 2 suitcases, a used laptop, and a bank account that barely covered my rent for the first 2 months. Gone were the luxuries of home. No more private chefs, no more cleaners, no more credit cards handed to me without question. For the first time, I was truly alone. And yet, I had never felt more alive. Every single day was a test of my resilience. I took freelance coding jobs wherever I could find them. I built ugly websites for local restaurants, fixed buggy apps for startups that could barely pay me, and even offered tech support at odd hours. I worked 14, sometimes 16 hours a day, eating instant noodles and sleeping on a secondhand mattress that sagged in the middle. There were nights when the loneliness crept in, when I questioned everything, wondering if my family had been right all along. Maybe I was the failure they said I was. But every time doubt whispered in my ear, I thought about my mother's voice at the gala, still trying to figure herself out. That sentence haunted me. It fueled me. Giving up was not an option. I enrolled in online courses to sharpen my skills. Machine learning, AI, app development, whatever was hot, I devoured. I attended every free networking event in the city, even if I had to sneak in. Slowly, things began to shift. My work improved. Clients began referring me to other clients. I saved every penny, refusing to live lavishly. The small wins began, stacking up. By my 3rd year, I had enough steady contracts to form my own small company. I called it NovaMed Solutions. The mission was simple but ambitious. Use technology to make healthcare more efficient and affordable. It wasn't glamorous. We weren't making social media apps or flashy games, but we were solving real problems, and that earned us respect. I hired my first employee, a programmer named Lucas who shared my hunger. Then came Maya, our marketing genius. Together, we worked out of a tiny office above a pizza shop, pulling late nights and surviving on caffeine and ambition. Investors didn't take us seriously at first. They saw a young woman without any notable pedigree in the tech world. I wasn't from Silicon Valley. I didn't have connections. But what I had was data. Proof that our platform worked. Proof that hospitals using NovaMed saved money and streamlined their patient care. I pitched relentlessly. I heard no so many times I lost count. But every rejection sharpened me. I refined my pitch, tweaked my business model, and kept pushing. Then the breakthrough came. A mid-sized hospital chain in Texas took a chance. On us. We delivered. Better than they expected. Word spread. Suddenly, other hospitals wanted in. Revenue skyrocketed. Within 18 months, we expanded beyond Texas. By year 5, NovaMed was valued at over $40 million. Venture capital came knocking. Forbes called top 30 under 30, they said. I smiled when I saw the article, not because of the recognition, but because I knew somewhere back in Charlotte, my parents, Ethan and Valerie, would see it too. I imagined them sitting in that oversized, cold living room of theirs, reading my name in disbelief. Madison Blake, not the family embarrassment, not the forgotten daughter, but the CEO, the visionary, the success story they never thought possible. Yet despite the validation, I never reached out. No phone calls, no emails, no awkward family reunions. I stayed silent. I wanted them to sit with the absence, to wonder, to stew in the mystery of what I had become. Deep down, I knew the world had a cruel sense of humor. Someday, somehow, life would turn the tables. They would need me. And when that moment arrived, they wouldn't be summoning the desperate little girl they used to ignore. No. They would be standing before the woman they created through years of neglect and dismissal. I didn't want revenge in the traditional sense. I didn't want to see them suffer or fail. I wanted something deeper. I wanted them to understand, to look me in the eyes and realize they had been wrong all along. And soon, that chance would come. Because one afternoon, as I sipped my coffee in my sleek Austin office overlooking the city skyline, my phone buzzed. It was a number I hadn't seen in years. Home. My stomach twisted, but I didn't answer right away. I let it ring. I let it ring until voicemail picked up. They could wait. After all, I had waited my entire life to be worth their call. It started with a news alert on my phone. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't thinking about them. But fate has a cruel way of making sure you can't outrun your past forever. Blake Industries under investigation for fraud. The headline read. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, unmoved. I was in the middle of preparing for an investor meeting, dressed in a sharp navy suit, my assistant waiting outside the door. I should have ignored it. I should have brushed it off like they always brushed me off. But curiosity got the best of me. I clicked. Ethan's smug face flashed on the screen, only this time, he wasn't posing at a charity golf tournament or shaking hands with CEOs. He was walking briskly into a courthouse, avoiding reporters, his lawyer shielding him like a human wall. Fraud, embezzlement, a shell company used to inflate profits and hide losses. I read every word of the article carefully, my pulse steady, my mind eerily calm. Valerie's name came up next. Her perfect little facade had cracked too. Divorce. Messy. Her husband filed for bankruptcy, blaming her reckless spending and demanding restitution. She lost her mansion, her cars, even her designer jewelry collection. She was now living in a rented townhouse on the outskirts of Charlotte, far from the exclusive neighborhoods she once ruled. As for my parents, they were eerily silent. But a quick search told me enough. Blake Industries had been the backbone of their empire. With its downfall, their assets were frozen. Creditors were circling like vultures. The Blake name, once revered, had become a punchline in Charlotte's elite circles. I should have felt something. Sadness, vindication, satisfaction maybe. But all I felt was cold detachment. The inevitable had happened. The house of cards they built so meticulously had collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. Still, I didn't reach out. Weeks passed. News outlets devoured the scandal. Ethan was indicted. Valerie's social media went dark. My parents were spotted at a local grocery store, dressed down and avoiding eye contact with old acquaintances. They had fallen. Hard. Then came the call. Unknown number. Charlotte area code. I let it go to voicemail the first time, then the second. By the third, curiosity won. I picked up. Madison! My mother's voice cracked through the receiver, brittle and small. It didn't sound like the Eleanor Blake I knew. Gone was the condescending tone, the sharpness that used to cut me down. We need to talk. I didn't speak. I let her fill the silence. It's about the family, about everything. Things are bad here, darling. Darling. She hadn't called me that since I was a child, back when she still pretended to care. Ethan is facing serious charges. Valerie's broke. Your father, he's not doing well. The company... I saw. I interrupted, my voice ice cold. I read the articles. There was a pause, then a desperate sigh. Madison, please. We need your help. You've done so well for yourself. Everyone's talking about Novamed. You're successful now. There it was. The shift. For years, I was nothing to them. Now suddenly, I was their savior. So now I'm worth something to you? I asked quietly. Madison, don't be cruel, she pleaded. We're still family. Family. That word hit differently now. Family doesn't discard you when you don't meet their expectations. Family doesn't mock you at galas. Family doesn't forget your name in rooms full of strangers. I'll think about it, I said flatly before hanging up. I didn't promise anything. I owed them nothing. But later that night, as I sat in my penthouse overlooking Austin, sipping wine, I couldn't shake the thought. Not about helping them, but about the power dynamic. They, who once made me feel invisible, were now crawling back, desperate for my attention. I slept soundly that night for the first time in years. The next morning, I booked a flight to Charlotte. Not out of obligation, but out of curiosity. I needed to see it, to see them in their downfall. When I arrived, the Blake estate was a shadow of its former self. The manicured lawns were overgrown. The grand chandelier in the foyer was dim. My parents looked older, smaller somehow. Valerie was gaunt, sitting quietly in a corner, her designer facade stripped away. Ethan wasn't even there, out on bail and hiding from the press. Madison, my father, Richard Blake, greeted me. His voice was hoarse, his eyes bloodshot. "Thank you for coming." I stayed silent, letting the weight of the moment hang in the air. My mother jumped in, explaining everything. How the company crumbled, how their friends abandoned them, how they were on the verge of losing the house. "We need a loan," she said finally, her eyes brimming with tears, "just until we get back on our feet." I almost laughed. Back on their feet? There was no coming back from this. Still, I kept my composure. "I'll think about it," I repeated, standing up and smoothing my blazer. But things would have to change. Drastically. They nodded eagerly, like desperate children seeking approval. In that moment, I realized something profound. They weren't just asking for money, they were asking for my forgiveness, for my validation, for me to acknowledge them again. I left that evening without making any promises. But one thing was clear. The power balance had shifted. The daughter they had ignored, mocked, and discarded was now the only one who could save them, and I wasn't sure yet if I even wanted to. I didn't say yes right away. That was the first power move. They expected me to rush in like a loyal daughter, swooping in to rescue them from the ashes they created. But I didn't. I flew back to Austin the very next day, leaving them hanging, desperate and uncertain. The silence spoke louder than words ever could. For weeks, they waited. I could feel it through the occasional texts and emails that came dripping in, each one more pleading than the last. "Please, Madison, can we talk again? Madison, your father isn't sleeping. Madison, we're scared." I ignored them. Not because I was cruel, but because they needed to understand. For 31 years, I had been an afterthought. They needed to taste what that felt like. Meanwhile, my life carried on. Nova Med had just secured a multi-million-dollar partnership with a national healthcare provider. I was meeting with lawyers, strategists, and PR teams daily. I was on magazine covers. Investors wanted to take the company public. I had more power than I ever dreamed of, and yet, a part of me still glanced at my phone every time their names popped up. Not because I missed them, but because I knew the end game was approaching. Eventually, my patience ran out. Or maybe my curiosity got the better of me. Either way, I decided it was time. Not to help. Not yet. But to return. To show them who I had become. I called my assistant, Jessica, and told her to clear my schedule for the weekend. "Book the jet," I said simply. "Charlotte?" The flight was surreal. As the plane soared through the clouds, I thought about the girl who had left that city in tears, carrying nothing but bitterness and dreams. She was gone now, replaced by someone sharper, colder, smarter, someone who had built herself from scratch. When the jet landed, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was calculated. Dressed in a tailored black suit, I looked every bit the corporate powerhouse I had become. My driver pulled up to the Blake estate, and for a brief second, nostalgia tried to creep in. But no, this wasn't home anymore. This was enemy territory. I stepped out, heels clicking against the stone pathway as I walked up to the grand front door. It opened before I could knock. My mother stood there, her face a mixture of hope and desperation. "Madison," she breathed, as if saying my name might undo years of neglect. "Come in, sweetheart." Sweetheart. They were pulling out all the stops now. I stepped inside. The house looked even worse than before. Dust lingered in corners. Expensive art had been removed from the walls. The scent of expensive candles and fresh flowers was gone, replaced by something much sadder: defeat. My father sat in the living room, a shell of the man he used to be. Valerie was there too, wearing sweatpants and no makeup, her eyes puffy, from what I assumed were sleepless nights. Ethan wasn't present. I didn't ask why. They invited me to sit, offering tea, like this was some casual family visit. I didn't touch it. "So," I began, cutting through the pleasantries, "what exactly do you expect from me?" My mother fumbled. My father cleared his throat. Valerie just looked down. Finally, my father spoke. "We need financial assistance. A loan. Temporary, of course. Just until things stabilize." I raised an eyebrow. "Temporary?" I echoed, almost amused. "Dad, you're being sued for fraud. Ethan might go to prison. Valerie's bankrupt. This isn't temporary. This is collapse." Silence. No one dared to argue. "So why me?" I continued, my voice steady, cold, professional. "Why not your friends, your board members, the people you spent decades impressing?" My mother's eyes filled with tears. "They've all abandoned us, Madison. You're the only one left." That was the truth, and it tasted sweeter than I imagined. I leaned back, crossing my legs slowly. "I'll consider helping," I said at last. Their faces lit up with premature relief. "But," I added, killing their joy instantly, "there will be conditions." "Of course, anything," my father said quickly, not even asking what the conditions were. Typical. Desperate people rarely think about consequences. "First," I said, my voice like steel, "I want full control, full ownership of whatever remains of Blake Industries. Any shares, assets, trademarks, they're mine." My father blanched. That's everything, Madison." "Exactly," I replied without emotion. "Second, this house. It's no longer yours. You can live here for now as my guests. But legally, it becomes my property." My mother looked like she might faint. Valerie just stared, stunned. "Third," I continued, unrelenting, "you will step away from any business decisions, permanently. You will sign over power of attorney to me. You will have no say, no influence, no interference. If I choose to sell Blake Industries tomorrow, you will watch silently." "Madison, this is harsh," my mother whispered. "Harsh?" I repeated, laughing softly. "No, Mother. Harsh was you mocking me at every dinner. Harsh was you calling me the other child at your precious galas. Harsh was this family pretending I didn't exist unless you needed something." No one spoke. They couldn't. I stood, adjusting my blazer. "You asked for help. This is my offer. Take it or lose everything." They didn't say yes immediately. Pride is hard to swallow. But I knew they would. They had no choice. As I walked toward the front door, my mother finally broke. "We'll sign," she said quietly. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded. "Good. Have my lawyers draft the paperwork." As I stepped outside into the fading daylight, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't revenge, not yet. This was reclamation. Taking back what they tried to deny me my whole life. I wasn't Madison, the forgotten daughter, anymore. I was Madison Blake, the woman who now owned everything they had once used to make me feel small. And for the first time in years, as the door closed behind me, I felt powerful, unapologetically powerful. The ink had barely dried on the contracts when the shift became undeniable. My phone buzzed constantly as lawyers, financial advisors, and board members redirected all Blake Industries matters to me. Overnight, I became the sole decision-maker. The very company my parents had spent decades building, the legacy they had obsessed over, was now under my control. They had no meetings to attend, no votes to cast, no influence to wield. They had willingly signed it all away. I wasn't cruel, at least not outwardly. I let them stay in the estate, though the deed now carried my name. I allowed them to keep their routines, morning walks in the garden, afternoon tea in the sunroom. But they did so as guests in my house. Not owners, not rulers, guests. Ethan's legal troubles worsened. He was indicted on multiple counts of fraud and tax evasion. The media circus was relentless. For the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't the golden boy. He was a disgraced ex-executive, clinging to a shred of dignity as his lawyers fought to keep him out of prison. Valerie fell silent, withdrawing into herself. Her socialite friends had abandoned her the moment the money dried up. Her divorce finalized quickly, her ex-husband taking what little she had left. She spent her days in oversized sweaters, avoiding eye contact, scrolling aimlessly through her phone like a ghost haunting the Blake estate. My parents, once vibrant and proud, shrank before my eyes. My father, who used to walk into rooms radiating power, now looked smaller every time I saw him. He spent most of his days in his study, pretending to read while avoiding reality. My mother tried harder to pretend. She hosted small gatherings, clinging to appearances, but the invitations grew fewer with each passing week. No one cared about the Blakes anymore, except me. I was the last one standing. At first, they treated me with forced politeness. They thanked me often, complimented me unnecessarily, as if trying to regain lost favor. But I wasn't interested in their approval anymore. I attended quarterly board meetings as CEO of Blake Industries and reshaped the company ruthlessly. Departments were cut. Old allies of my father were fired. I pivoted the business to tech-driven solutions and sold off outdated divisions. Within months, profitability returned. Investors praised me. The press lauded my vision. Headlines read, "The young CEO reviving the Blake empire." Every success was another nail in the coffin of the old regime. My parents noticed. They watched me from afar as I rebuilt everything they had destroyed. They never said it aloud, but I saw it in their eyes. Regret. They realized I had been capable all along, that I had been the one worth betting on. Not Ethan, not Valerie, me. Still, there was no grand confrontation. No tearful apologies or heartfelt reconciliations. That wasn't how our family worked. Instead, the power dynamic revealed itself in small moments. Like when my mother asked if she could host a charity brunch and I simply replied, "No, not this year. We're cutting expenses." Or when my father suggested I consider rehiring some of his old friends, and I smiled and said, "I'm running things my way now." They never pushed back. They couldn't. They knew better. Months later, as the dust finally settled and Blake Industries returned to its former glory, albeit under a very different leadership, I decided to host a dinner. Not out of sentiment, but to make it clear once and for all. It was a quiet evening, just my parents, Valerie, and myself. Ethan couldn't make it. Prison had a way of ruining family get-togethers. I kept the mood light at first. We ate. We exchanged meaningless small talk. Then, as dessert arrived, I set my fork down and looked around the table. "Do you know what's funny?" I asked, my voice calm but cutting. They looked at me, confused. "When I left Charlotte all those years ago, none of you cared. You didn't call. You didn't ask how I was. You didn't even notice I was. Gone. I wasn't important enough." Silence hung heavy in the room. No one dared interrupt. "Now, look at us," I continued. "You live in my house. You answer to my rules. The company you once loved more than your own children is mine now. Not borrowed, not shared. Mine." My mother's eyes glistened with unshed tears. My father looked down at his plate, ashamed. Valerie just stared, hollow and empty. I leaned back, savoring the weight of the moment. This wasn't about cruelty. This wasn't revenge for the sake of revenge. This was closure. "You called me the forgotten daughter," I said, my voice soft but deadly. "You treated me like I was invisible, like I didn't matter. But now you all orbit around me. You depend on me. Without me, you would have nothing." I stood slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. They remained seated, powerless, exactly where I wanted them. "Remember this," I said, gathering my things. "I didn't become who I am today in spite of you. I became who I am because of you. Every cruel word, every dismissal, every time you made me feel small, it built me." I paused at the door, glancing back one last time. You should be proud. You didn't just create Madison Blake, the forgotten daughter. You created Madison Blake, the queen. With that, I walked out, leaving them in stunned silence. That night, as I returned to my penthouse in Austin, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt peace. The game was over. The tables had turned. And in the end, the daughter they ignored became the only name that truly mattered.